Okay, before you watch this, to get context, go watch the Texas Revolution video. Okay, now with context, let's explain what America was doing during the Mexican Revolution and the Texas Revolution. When Mexico popped up, it became an instant enemy of the United States and land and economy. Also during this time, America was balancing free states into the Union and slave states into the Union. This was an unstable balance that the government could barely do anything about, as the slave states would always threaten to break away from the Union. The only thing keeping the country together was an equal state balance and the love of manifest destiny. Manifest destiny is the idea that America is destined with glory and honor. In order to gain that honor, they must conquer the continent. And after Louisiana Purchase, America wanted to see what was beyond the Great Territory. So they sent Lewis and Clark to the unknown land known as Oregon. And with the help of Sacagawea, they reached the ocean. What they found was an abundance of wild animals, food, and land. Not so long after returning, the Oregon Territory was claimed by the red, white, and blue. But later, Lady Britannia would also claim this land for her future dominion in the Hudson's Bay Company. Now with Oregon claimed, America needed more land to expand or else the country would explode. Soon, the Texas Republic was unveiled and asked the USA for annexation. Jackson, who was the president at the time, wanted to annex the Republic so badly, but he loved the Union. Jackson understood America was an experiment of democracy, and since the other democracy experiment failed, Jackson needed to keep the experiment alive and well. If he annexed Texas, that would upset the North, which would make the South secede, and he almost had that happen over tariff laws. This was way bigger, so Jackson said no, and Texas did its own thing, and for a while, Americans just had their eyes on getting Oregon. Some Americans also started to look at land in California and New Mexico. Meanwhile, in 1842, the Oregon Trail was made by John C. Fremont and Kit Carson, hunter extraordinaire. This trail led to the Oregon having a population 6-1, comparing Americans to the British in the area. And soon, the mighty power and the young republic would begin a joint occupation. Now America began to drool over California and New Mexico, which began to make more tension in the area, which left America and Mexico ready for war. One spark would light the oil. Soon President Polk, a big friend of Jackson, rose to power. His territorial expansion plans were not so secret, saying he wanted Oregon, New Mexico, and California. But in order to gain New Mexico and California, Polk and the U.S. would need Texas, and that's what he did in 1845. Doing this, they were annexing territory that was technically Mexican, which caused further tensions. More on the pile is that Texas had tons of disputed territory out west, which took up parts of New Mexico. But for some reason, Mexico did not attack, which was bad for Polk. Polk needed Mexico to attack. The U.S. or Congress would never declare war on Mexico, which would mean Polk would never have New Mexico and California. So Polk came up with a plan. William Marcy! Yes, President? Okay, here's the plan. We need Mexico to attack us, so we're going to send troops down towards disputed territory to solve the border dispute with the Mexicans. Well, sir, that makes my job way easier, but I'm not going to tell the Mexicans, which looks like that we are invading Mexico, even though we're in disputed territory. Plus, I don't have to tell Congress because I'm the president. Send Zachary Taylor down there right away. Yes, sir. Okay, who do I have on my list? And Fremont. Yes, sir. Listen up. You and Kit Carson are going to find the beginning of some river, and then you're going to go to California and begin the Bear Flag Revolt and declare the Republic of California, and then we'll annex California. Okay, who questioned Polk's plans to make war with Mexico? No one. Zachary Taylor and his force walked into the disputed area, and the Mexicans killed 17 Americans, thinking it was an American invasion. American forces were pushed back to Fort Texas, where they defended their ground after onslaught of Mexican troops. Soon Taylor would leave the fort and would be followed by Mexican forces and Mexican reinforcements. The Battle of Palo Alto engaged the two forces, with the Americans winning. The Mexicans began to retreat to the Rio Grande, only to surrender after the Battle of Rescana de la Palmera. When the news got to Washington, Polk asked Congress to declare war on the Mexican government, and Congress agreed. On May 13th, America declared war on Mexico, only the second time in American history. Soon, American troops entered other parts of claimed Texas with minimal resistance, such as the Battle of Moromus, where Mexican troops simply left. Let's travel back in time to spring, where the Bear-fought revolt was being prepared for, with Fremont reaching Fort Sutter's, a small American settlement. Fremont was able to convince the locals to begin to create militias for revolt. Now go to June, where those militias were huge. On June 7th, a band of 30 militiamen, separate from the main group, but were still enforced by Fremont, attacked Sonoma, just north of San Francisco, against a small Mexican force. After this victory, the small band of soldiers declared the Californian Republic and drew a flag with a bear on it. Fremont became the de facto president of this new republic and combined their forces. Meanwhile, the U.S. Navy had finally made it to California and took the town of Monterey unopposed. Seeing this, the unknown Californian government quickly dissolved itself and joined the U.S. They quickly met up with American troops, and together they took control of San Francisco. Back in Texas, Americans finally crossed the border into Camargo. Next, Stephen Kearny began to invade New Mexico, and after the Battle of Santa Fe, aka No One's There, Kearny took control of New Mexico. Soon Kearny found that holding New Mexico was harder than he thought, with a lot of revolts. The Mexican forces had got themselves together and tried to retake New Mexico, but failed after the Army of Occupation, a few thousand soldiers and some Texas Rangers led by Zachary Taylor, defeated them at the Battle of Monterey. Meanwhile, Mexican General Flores began to reinvade California. He began with the invasion with besieging Los Angeles and actually won, making it the first Mexican victory since the beginning of the war. This success did not even end here. Later, 50 Mexicans in California, captured 25 Americans in California. Again, 500 Marines were defeated by 90 Mexican militiamen because they possessed a cannon. The Mexicans would also defeat an invasion of Tabasco from the U.S. Navy. The luck streak would run out on November when Americans took Tampico. The Americans would finish the year off with some campaigns in California and New Mexico. Soon, America, after a few battles, retook Los Angeles. Meanwhile, in New Mexico, a few rebellions needed to be crushed. America did fail to retake a city in New Mexico, though. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, American convinced the exiled Santa Anna to return to Mexico to convince the Mexican government to surrender. Santa Anna returned and immediately betrayed the Americans and became the president of Mexico for the fourth time or something. After another uprising in New Mexico, one of the biggest battles of the entire war happened, known as the Battle of Buena Vista, which is so important. I'm making a short about it, which you can watch right now, and then you can come back to hear it. All you need to know, really, is that no one really won. After this, America went back to their campaigns in California with wins in Sacramento, but the Americans would take Veracruz on Mexico's coast and began marching towards Mexico City. You see, this war was planned before it even began. There were 3 separate campaigns. One would push Mexican troops out of disputed territory and some Mexican territory. Second was to take New Mexico and California. And the third and final campaign was to capture Mexico City. The first two they weren't as good as they thought. Let's just say that. Many troops had to stay behind in order so Americans could actually keep California and New Mexico, which prolonged the war for a little bit. Meanwhile, how was support of the war back home? Abraham Lincoln saw the war as trying to expand slavery out west, which he really opposed. If you want to know why, everyone really knew that if you removed slavery from the South, it would collapse. So if you stopped expanding it and make sure those areas weren't under slavery influence, then you can't let slavery expand and have more land for eventually when it became illegal, you would have less drama, less starvation. But most other politicians did not agree. Most believed that this territory would help American business and wealth. Back in Mexico, Americans had captured Puerto and was closer to Mexico City. Back up north, Americans fought off Mexican militiamen and Indian Alliance warriors. Americans slowly pushed forward through Mexico with the battles of Tuxpan. During all this fighting on land, the mighty U.S. Navy had been blockading Mexican towns such as Pasco. Pasco would be landed on and the port secured. Back in New Mexico, most insurgencies began in Las Vegas. All rebellions pretty much ended after the Chianga Creek battle. By September, American troops were on the outskirts of Mexico City. Santa Anna tried to destroy the supply line, but failed. Santa Anna began the battle for Mexico City, which was a loss for Mexico. Mexico City was finally in a siege. Before entering Mexico City, Mexican forces gave Santa Anna a slapper, and then Americans entered Mexico City. After this, America went crazy in Baja California in the Gulf of California region, and Americans kept pushing Santa Anna even into the new year until finally a truce was signed on March 6. Soon that they would discover that the rest of the Mexican government had signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which had been signed on February 2nd. The treaty gave the U.S. government New Mexico and California, cheaper than the original price of $30 million to $15 million. After the war, Americans began mass settling in the New Mexico and California territories. California would gain tons of settlers due to the gold rush and the Great Dust Bowl. Fremont would become the first governor of the territory of California. He would also become the first Republican president nominee. He would later be territorial governor of New Mexico. California would become a state in 1850 without slavery. The war for Mexico would help lead to the next revolution in Mexico in 1910. The Mexican-American War caused America to the ocean. To get to the ocean, and that's a problem. I've already talked about this, but if America stops expanding, people care about politics. Soon, the center of politics was the idea of slavery. Was bad or good, and that meant war. Wait! What? What is it, Frankenpleers? I bought more land. What? This series isn't over. You still have to talk about me in the next video, which will be out in like a week or so. Oh, so you're going to help stop the war? No, I actually helped expand slavery. Okay, can you at least give them plans for the channel until like Thanksgiving, aka the American one. Okay, after the Gadsden Purchase, we're leaving the U.S. zone in the entire modern era and go to ancient times, talking about Alexander the Great's dad and then the Battle of Jericho, like the one from the Bible. Then we're going to do a video about the War in the Roses. Maybe, I don't really know yet. Then we'll do a video about every American and British/Canadian border dispute. Finally, we'll talk about the most powerful man ever, Charles V. Thanks. If any YouTubers want to collab or just have their voices in the video, just email me in the about section of my channel. I would really want someone to collab with me on the border dispute video because I don't want people listening to my voice over and over again. So please, if you could collab.